going, y'all? It's Maciej from Trey back again. We're going to do a French press today, make some really tasty coffee. French press, definitely one of the most forgiving brew methods, one of the easiest brew methods. Makes really, really tasty coffee. We'll talk a little later about kind of what kind of coffee it makes exactly. But yeah, really easy to do, highly recommended. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to preheat this French press. So unlike a pour over, you're not going to be constantly adding more fresh hot water to this. So I really want to make sure that the French press itself isn't taking any heat away, isn't acting as a heat sink and making our brew colder throughout. So I'm going to take some water, just going to pour it in there, let it sit a little, and that's going to keep our French press from losing too much heat in the brewing process. In the meantime, we're going to grind some coffee. So 50 grams of coffee for this recipe. It's going to be 50 grams of coffee to 750 grams or milliliters of water for a 1 to 15 or 15 to 1, depending on which way we're talking, brew ratio. A little stronger than I would do for a pour over, but still a pretty regular drip brew ratio. Yeah, so let me grind that up. Coarsely ground coffee for here. Oh yeah, and we have in our little measuring cup a heaping half cup, let's say, of coffee. Again, highly recommend scale for brewing. Really make everything better, much more consistent. If you don't have one, totally fine as well. About a heaping half cup for a nice medium roast. A darker roast, you'll probably want to add a little more coffee. A super light roast that's a little more dense, you'll probably want to just maybe do a flat half cup. That'll work out nicely. So I'm going to grind it pretty coarsely. You definitely don't need to go wild and go to like the coarsest setting on your grinder for a French press for most grinders, I'd say, but you do definitely want it considerably coarser than like a pour over medium grind. So I'm going to turn around and do that. I'll be right back. Ground coarsely and ready to go. Gonna get my water out of there, and then I'm gonna put this on the scale. I basically want to be ready to start brewing basically as soon as I put the coffee into my French press. There's still a little moisture there, so the coffee that initially hits that's going to start being extracted from, and I want everything to get wet fairly at the same time. So I'm going to get that in there. My water just popped off the boil right when I started grinding, so that should be pretty perfect. Going to get the coffee in there, tear out my scale, start my timer, and start pouring. If you don't have like a gooseneck kettle like this, this is, I would say, one of the least important brew methods to have that exact pouring from. So this is totally fine with like a tea kettle. I swirled my French press around a little just because I do want to make sure that all the grinds are getting wet at the same time, roughly. And again, I'm pouring 750 grams of water on my 50 grams of coffee. So I had just enough water in the kettle there. No need to have this on my scale. And I'm going to wait till 1 minute, and then I'm going to give this a stir. You'll notice that there are some grinds kind of floating like a crust on the top here. And I just want to give it a gentle stir to reintegrate those grinds into the rest of the coffee. I don't want them just floating up there exposed to air, not exposed to the hot water there. So it's going to do that right now. No need to stir too violently. Just a gentle reincorporation there. And then I'm going to put my cap back on. I'm going to press down just very gently to have my screen resting on top of the coffee there, just to make sure any of those grinds that are still floating at the top get pushed down a little. So we're at almost a minute 30. This is a 4-minute brew time. Again, like I said, French press is fairly forgiving, so if you leave it there like a little bit extra, it'll still probably taste pretty delicious. That said, we're just going to do kind of our best effort here to get it as perfect as possible. Like I said earlier, we had a 15-to-1 brew ratio on this, which is a little stronger than like the 16.5 to 1 I usually do for pour overs. Because the French press lets all those oils through its metal filter, you're getting a little bit less clarity than if you used a paper filter. So I just want to make sure the coffee's strong enough to kind of punch through those oils and really give you all those nice flavors. The positive thing that those oils will do for sure is it'll give your coffee a little more body, so your coffee will feel a little smoother, a little bigger than if you were just drinking a paper filter coffee. It will, back to the other hand, let through probably a little bit of silt, so a little bit of the kind of finest grinds that happen when you grind coffee. We would love it if our coffee grinders put every particle exactly the same, but sadly some kind of like dusty fine grinds will come off no matter kind of how good your grinder is. So those generally will pass through a mesh filter in a way that they won't a paper filter, but that's totally fine, and especially if we're rather gentle at the end, you won't get too many of those at the bottom of your cup. There isn't really a way in a French press to stop them from coming through completely. This is a nice medium roast chocolatey coffee. As far as what coffee works best in a French press, I think actually a French press is a brew method that will make any coffee taste pretty good. If you like a more oily body, if you don't mind some of that silt, then even super gentle, super acidic coffees will taste pretty great in a French press. They might not be as clean as they would with a paper filter pour over, but they will still definitely taste delicious. If you're into dark roasts, I think dark roasts actually taste quite a bit better with a metal filter than with a paper filter, because I think those oils really buffer some of those super sharp, dark roasty flavors really nicely. But I kind of think, you know, with some exceptions, you can basically make any coffee taste good in any brew method as long as you like that coffee to start with, and as long as you like that brew method to start with. We have 20 seconds left till we want to plunge. Like I said, not the end of the world if you let that coffee sit there for a while, but we want to make this taste as good as it can. So I'm just going to get some cups lined up and pour it out. I'm going to press pretty gently. I don't want like a ton of agitation to move those grinds around at this point. So at 4 minutes, just going to start gently pressing down. And I do want to get that coffee out. Just because you've pressed down doesn't really mean that those grinds at the bottom are separated from that liquid. So I don't want to just kind of pour out into one cup and let the rest of that coffee sit there for a while. I just want to get it out as quickly as possible. Even if you're making this much coffee for yourself, just get the rest of that coffee out into a carafe or some other kind of vessel. And there we go. This recipe, you know, if you want to make coffee for yourself, great. It's a lot of coffee, but you can definitely drink all of it. Makes a pretty good size cup for 2 people, let's say like a medium coffee, and definitely makes enough coffee for 3 people as well if you're good with having a little less. So again, French press, really tasty coffee, big body, pretty easy to make, and yeah, classic brew method for a reason. Thanks, y'all.